From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello everyone, I'm Tomoko Steen at Science, Technology and Business Division here at the Library of Congress. Today's event is sponsored by our division, Science, Technology and Business Division. Last month, we organized a lecture on microbiome, which is the gut system and your health and cancer. And last month's speaker from NIH was talking about to maintain the good health, you have to have a good diet. And the diet health is such an important connection, as everyone knows. And you have to maintain the good gut microbes. So I thought it's a nice continuous discussion on this topic. And we have a wonderful speaker, Amy Riolo is the fellow Cornellian and a very good friend of mine. And I'm so happy to be able to introduce her to everyone with this new book just published. She's a food critic and chef and a teacher, and she also organizes a cruise and all sorts of things. She's a multi-talented, I don't know how to say, chef. And you can enjoy this talk. You know, it's learning about good food, but also how we can maintain good health. So before further ado, please join me the welcoming the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here. This is the fourth time that I've had the pleasure to speak and do a podcast at Library of Congress for my books. So I've spoken on different topics before. The first one was my first book, which is called Arabian Delights, and I presented it. There's a podcast you can see on the website called Understanding Middle Eastern Arab Cuisine and Culture. Then I did my second one, which is called the Cuisine and Culture of Understanding the Cuisine and Culture of Egypt. I also did a program for National Diabetes Awareness Month. We did that together with Laverne in November. And so, and also part of the book festival. I was really pleased to be a part of that this last summer. And today we're talking about the Mediterranean diet. Today, and actually this whole month, is Mediterranean Diet Awareness Month. So it's perfect that you're here. And I really appreciate Tomoko and all of the efforts that she made in making this happen today. The topic that I'd like to talk about today is how we can use the Mediterranean diet to transform a lot of the illnesses that plague our modern society. As I mentioned, it's Mediterranean Diet Month, so if any of you are on social media, you can use this hashtag, and these are all of my different handles. This is the book that we're going to be talking about today, which is my sixth book. It's the Ultimate Mediterranean Diet Handbook, How to Harness the Power of the World's Healthiest Diet to Live Better Longer. We're going to discuss the definition of the Mediterranean diet, how the Mediterranean diet can be used to transform illness. We're going to talk about historical and cultural facts in the Mediterranean that make the diet both pleasurable and healthful. And we're also going to talk about some more practical tips like ingredients and portion sizes, as well as grocery shopping and recipes and meal plans, because my ideas and theories are wonderful, but if you can't put them into practice, they're only so good. So we're going to be able to bring it home for people in the audience today. As we define the Mediterranean diet, it's important to know that this is a traditional way of eating that people have been enjoying for millennia throughout the Mediterranean region. So we're going to talk about all of the different 25 countries and the different types of things that they have in common and the healthful ideas and practices that they put into use every day. The term the Mediterranean diet was really coined here in the United States in 1993 by an organization called Old Ways, of which I am a culinary advisor on their Mediterranean Foods Alliance. They've teamed together with Harvard School of Public Health and the European Office of the World Health Organization in order to define and create this Mediterranean diet pyramid. So you can look at the pyramid and see the different tiers, and we're going to be talking a lot about them today because they really help us to be able to put this plan into practice. Did any of you know that, unfortunately, diet is the leading killer of adults in the US today? So it's the perfect time to be able to talk about these different solutions, especially the healthful, easy, and pleasurable ones that people can use, like the Mediterranean diet. One of the bonuses of this diet is that it's not truly a diet, but actually a lifestyle that people can put into place with not only ease, but also with pleasure and some things that will bring happiness into your life as well. So this is the Mediterranean diet pyramid. On the left, we have the 1993 version, and now they've upgraded with a 2015 version. And it's important to note the difference between the two, because as research continues, and there's been wonderful research. In the last few years, I've included in my book all of the best research from the last 2 years from all around the Mediterranean and in the United States that they have found to prove the efficacy of the Mediterranean diet. And so as they find more and more research, they modify it a little bit. What you'll see on the left, the bottom, from that one in the 1993, the bottom was breads and grains. It went right into foods and ingredients and was talking about those. Whereas now, the new version, what they found by studies was that it's not food at all that's the base of the Mediterranean diet, it's lifestyle. So we're talking about being physically active and enjoying and sharing meals with others. That's now the base of the diet. So my book is organized like each of these tiers on the pyramid. So the first chapter, instead of talking about appetizers or foods that you would normally open up a meal with, I actually talk about being physically active and enjoying meals with others in creative ways for people to do that. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's something that we take for granted the most, and it's really the most important backbone of this diet or lifestyle. And there are a lot of sayings in every language in the Mediterranean that you should choose who you eat with before you choose what you're going to eat. So, as we think about our day, it's very important to plan that out. Don't, even before you go to the grocery store and start fretting about what you're going to cook and how you're going to get it on your table at night, think about spend a couple weeks just thinking about who am I going to eat with today. And that's a wonderful idea. I even suggest, with social media, people who live alone in different neighborhoods, people are starting to get together now and having, you don't have to even call it a potluck. You can just kind of make a lunch date or a dinner date or a breakfast date. And that does enormous psychological benefits. They're finding those more and more. That's one of the things in the Mediterranean, whether you're in France or Israel or Morocco or Egypt, people usually know every day that they're going to have at least one meal with loved ones, with neighbors, with colleagues, and that having that knowledge and just that belief and idea in your body is really, really beneficial, because it does a lot for your psyche and for your psychological well-being to know that you're not alone. And that's what they're finding the more and more with the research in the Mediterranean diet. Of course, the other one is being physically active. Again, we have to get a little bit more creative than in the Mediterranean, because in a lot of these blue zones and areas where they find people to live to be, bless you, centenarians for a long time, we find that in those regions, people actually are physically active because they have to be, not because they make it a choice to go to the gym. Maybe you're a farmer or a shepherd and you have to, that's your life and the physical activity involved in your life, or a fisherman. Or even if you're a regular person living in a city like Rome, you still have a lot of extra work that you have to do just to live your daily modern life. You might have a car, but you probably have to park about a mile away from the historic center where you work in order to get there. So you're walking. You have modern appliances in your beautiful apartment, but you don't have a dryer because they just don't use them in Europe. So you have to hang your clothes out. There are all of these little types of things that people do every day that add up in terms of physical activity. So I tell people, remember, cooking is a physical activity. And even if you cook and you're eating a meal which might be have a little bit too much fat or cholesterol than some people might like in our culture, the fact that you're cooking it yourself, that you're going to the store, that you're getting the ingredients, or you're going to the farmer's market, or maybe you're even growing them in a little pot out back, that has some physical activity in it for you, which is beneficial. So if we can just open up our minds to different types of physical activity, that also sets us up to be a little bit more successful. And then the next tier of the diet, instead of separating them like they used to do in 1993, now we have one whole big tier dedicated to plant-based foods. These are the foods that each and every meal should be based upon. So fruits and vegetables, of course, at the bottom, but also beans and legumes and nuts and seeds and olive oil. We're going to talk about all of those today. Every meal should have those in them, and a wide variety of color and textures in order to guarantee our good health. The next tier, which I have a chapter for, are fish and seafood. So people in the Mediterranean are supposed to be eating seafood about 2 to 3 times a week, and we're going to talk about some different options and the benefits behind those. Then we have a tier for poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt, which are to be enjoyed in a little bit more moderation, but still regularly and all throughout the Mediterranean region. And then my final chapter is meats and sweets, which as a chef, I get a lot of flack for because culinarily you don't usually think about meats and sweets together. But from a health perspective, they're at the end of the book. They're the least very good, delicious, rich recipes, but still just a few of them because those are the things we want to eat on holidays, on special occasions, once a week when we get together with the whole entire family. In the Mediterranean, no matter where you are, if it's on Friday in a Muslim country or on Saturday in Israel or on Sunday in a Christian country, people, when they get together for their day of rest or their big communal meal, that's when they're eating the meats and sweets. And it's usually, traditionally, it hasn't been every day, even though they're available everywhere today. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I got started because I think this is important to the story and it drives home the fact that eating this way is a no-brainer and that anybody can do it. I got started when I was a teenager. I was the family cook, so I was the one who put the meal on the table for the family when my mom went to work. And I enjoyed doing that. But when I was 15, my mom got diagnosed with diabetes. And she came home with a little note like this prescription pad. It was literally written on a prescription pad. The doctor had written all of the things that she should not eat. And she handed me this note and she was like, "I've got diabetes." And we were like, oh, we were devastated. And for about 3 days, we just kind of silently mourned all of our favorite foods that we're no longer going to be able to eat. And as a kid, I didn't really know what to do. This was before the internet and before all of these wonderful diabetes-friendly cookbooks that we have today. So I really was at a loss for what to do. But after I got the idea, I said, okay, I'm going to make a list of everything that we should eat or that we could eat. So I made a list, all the fruits, made a list of all the vegetables, of all the grains. And then I just started making food be as similar to what our family was used to as possible, but with foods that my mom could eat. And then as I got savvier, I said, well, hey, these are the foods that she can eat, but let's think about the foods that will really cure her. Which of these ingredients have things that people with diabetes should be eating? We're going to talk about those too. And so that's how I started. So I figure if I was 15, had no degree, and nothing to equip me and could do it, everyone else can do it as well. And then the picture on the other side is the historic center of Crotone, which is a city in Calabria in Egypt. It was part of Magna Graecia. It was an ancient Greek colony. And that's where Pythagoras lived. That's where my family's originally from. And another thing that drove home this idea of the Mediterranean diet and why we all need to do it is because I went to visit the family and I saw that we all have a twin over there. Everyone on this side of the Atlantic has somebody over there who looks the same, acts the same. They just dress differently and they speak a different language. But we have the same genes. Most of the people, unfortunately, in my family on this side of the Atlantic have diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, heart disease, and many other issues. Everybody over there was fine. They were a lot older. They had maybe even a more difficult life than the people over here had, but they were very, very healthy. And so when I would ask them about the health issues, they would look at me like I was crazy. So it's not in our genes to have this. We don't know how you ended up that way. And so I said, oh, great. So I started doing a little more research and I said, okay, it's got to be the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle. So then it became kind of my mission to promote it in the US. And there's a term that we're using nowadays. It's going to become very, very fashionable, like so many other ancient things that come back into fashion, and that is culinary medicine. And this is the combination of the art of cooking and eating with science, nutrition, and medicine. It's becoming more and more popular in the US. You're going to hear it all over. There's lots of hashtags for it. And doctors are going to school to study nutrition and study, actually they're going to culinary school, some of them, to become chefs and understand a little bit more about food, and vice versa. Because we're realizing what the ancients knew, that food can be used to cure the body. And that's been done for millennia. This is a famous quote many of you know from Hippocrates. And one of the other interesting things that people might find useful is that about 69 to 70% of what was available for us in ancient Egyptian texts that they found, medical texts, has been proven to be true by the British Pharmaceutical Codex. And this was in the 1970s. And I always tell people, now that doesn't mean that the other 30 to 31% wasn't true. Maybe it just means that we don't have the wherewithal to prove it to be true yet. So these are many, many things that people were using in ancient times to heal their bodies that we can tap into now. We have, of course, the plethora of vegetables that are available to us today is wonderful, and all of them are good, and all of them have their own unique benefits. But if you're looking at cancer and specific compounds which help to have protect us against cancer, especially breast cancer, skin cancer, and other types, you want to look to the more cruciferous vegetables like cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and broccoli. They have indoles and isothiocyanates, which are really wonderful for being used as anti-cancer properties. So if you're interested interested in any of that, or that's a concern for you, these are some wonderful vegetables they have on hand. In this next section, I'm going to kind of go through with some very specific ingredients and properties that are in these different topics and different ingredients. And I do this because sometimes I speak to medical professionals or doctors or counselors or people who on a daily basis interface with the public on their health. And I want to give them good, quick examples and suggestions for their clients to be able to incorporate into their lifestyle. So another thing are fruits. Fruits are wonderful for us, and we can eat a variety of different colors and textures to give us the nutrients that we need in our daily diets. Always eat what's seasonal and local, but people forget about dried fruits. If fruits are dried naturally, sun-dried, not with sugar added to them, these are really, really good for us. They're very nutrient dense. They have a lot of dietary fiber and potassium, phenolic compounds, which have benefits that can help us with heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So they're a wonderful food to take on the go. I like to think of them as nature's fast food. Just make sure you're not using the ones with additional sugar. And then grains. Now, grains get really a bad rap nowadays in the media, and part of it is not their fault. It's about the fault of the way that we've been treating them. But regardless, some grains have to be avoided by some people, but there is still a wonderful variety of healthy grains, and people can usually find some that work with them. So the ones that we want to talk about when we're talking about the Mediterranean diet and eating healthfully are whole wheat, if you don't have a sensitivity or an allergy or have any celiac problems. This is also Celiac Awareness Month. Quinoa, brown rice, amaranth, millet, black rice, rye, farro, which is an ancient Italian grain that's a relative of spelt, kamut, teff, oats, buckwheat, kashi, corn, muesli, and fufu. Fufu is from the cassava plant, and it's an African flour that's becoming more and more popular in the U.S. thanks to the immigrant community. Now, there have been a lot of studies done on grains because grains are something that we all have access to around the world. And the Cleveland Clinic recently did a study of about 2,000 people, which they had them add 3¼ ounces of high fiber whole grains to their diet per day. And they found that reduced the risk of colorectal cancer by about 20%. They also found that obesity, heart disease, and diabetes were also reduced when people added these healthy whole grains into their diet. Now, to understand grains and understand why they're so important in the Mediterranean, why we shouldn't just automatically demonize them without knowing exactly which ones we're talking about, are because grains have had a really important part in the Mediterranean culture. They weren't just something to eat. They weren't the staple that we have today. And this is for many ingredients, not only grains. But a lot of the things that we take for granted, like salt and flour and these things that we just have in our cabinet, they were important commodities during ancient times. Lentils were literally worth their weight in gold. A lot of times in Italy and other places in the Mediterranean, people will have lentil dishes for New Year's, like the way in the South we have black-eyed peas. And people say that's, especially, you look in any cookbook, they'll tell you that's because lentils look like coins. But no, it's because lentils were coins. People use them as currency. So that if you think about lentils as currency or as gold, it gives you a very different feel than the way we have it in the back of our cupboard today, like, oh, if we get a winter storm, maybe then I'll drag out the lentils and use them. It just gives it a whole different way of looking at it. So these very common, very basic, simple ingredients actually can be brought to an elevated status when you think about their history and the way they're used. Same thing with grains. Grains, we have to cut down on grains in this culture because of the way that we're treating it, because they're added as fillers in so many foods and they're present in all of these processed foods. But in the original times, grains weren't so easy to come by. And even if you were wealthy enough to afford a grain, you probably, about 90% of the population, couldn't afford the milling. They used to put very high taxes on milling grains so that the poorer you were, the least amount of grains you could eat. And even in many areas, people used to actually eat the residual of what was left over and thrown away from the milling process. They would then bake or burn those grains. And in Italy, there's something called grano arso, which is actually called burnt grain, and that's what the peasants used to eat. So to be able to have wheat was a luxury. And now, of course, we've gone overboard with it, and that's why we have to go back. But it's important to understand this culture that took place in the Mediterranean. Again, beans and legumes are wonderful. If you have to add one thing into your diet that you're not doing already, beans and legumes are a great thing to do it. Just one a day. There's a wonderful variety of different things that you can have. They're easy to cook. They're cheap. They can lend themselves. You can add them and toss them into salads or soups or stews, and they're delicious. If they're low in fat, high in protein, and in fiber. Beans, especially fava beans, were actually the world's oldest agricultural crop, so they've been around forever. They're also used as currency. Wild chickpeas were first cultivated about 11,000 years ago, so they're very common to many people's diets. And chickpea flour, which is a great gluten-free alternative, is also common in a lot of places in the Mediterranean. Luckily today, we're getting a lot of heirloom beans and legumes that are back on the market. So for not too inexpensive of a price, you can have a wonderful product that you can be guaranteed is really helpful for you and has all of these benefits. The next topic is nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds have such a beautiful place in the Mediterranean, no matter where you are. If you're strolling along the Mediterranean shores in Alexandria, Egypt, or in Sicily, or in Jerusalem, you will find kiosks, counters, street vendors with nuts and with seeds. And people go to them on a daily basis. If you go to the cafe to meet your friends at night, maybe you're going to play backgammon, maybe you're going to play cards, maybe you're just going to chatter, you will stop and get some type of seeds or nuts and bring them, and you'll be in the wee hours eating pumpkin seeds or some pistachios or maybe some walnuts, depending upon what's in season. And that's just a nice snack food that people enjoy instead of candy and the popcorn that we do here. So nuts and seeds have a wonderful benefit. And now we're doing a lot of research on things like flax seeds. People are using them for omega-3s and the linens that they have in them. People are very aware of almonds and all of the wonderful properties that they have for them. But they found that eating a handful of them can really help to curb your appetite, in addition to all of the wonderful healthful fats that are present in them. So now we talk about seafood and the kind of more lean meats that take place in the Mediterranean. It's important to know, as we think of, we tend to have a type of pescatarian or animal-based protein, most of us, unless we're vegetarian, in our diets with every meal in the United States. In the Mediterranean, not so much. Again, it's mostly plant-based foods. It's mostly those beans and legumes that you're getting your protein from, maybe some dairy on a daily basis. But the seafood would also come a little bit less frequently. So the diet recommends that we eat it 2 to 3 times a week, but actually there are also cultural reasons because of that and economic reasons. The ideas of the sea wayfaring are deep traditions, and people would go, there would be fishermen dotted, there are fishing villages ever since Phoenician times all around the Mediterranean where people would get their fish and catch and bring it in for the day. But depending upon the marine biology and these patterns, migratory patterns of fish, you wouldn't have every single type of fish available to you every day. You would have whatever fish was in season, whatever was available, and whatever the fishermen could catch depending upon the weather. So even fish, which we take for granted and think of it as a substitute or sometimes a punishment. If it's during Lent, you've got to eat fish. But in the Mediterranean, it was always viewed as a celebratory dish. In the Nile, in ancient Egypt, they used to have festivals, and during their the time that they were leading up to their festivals, they would have what they called fasting periods. And during the fasting periods, the fish or anything that came out of the Nile was off limits because the Nile was considered to be sacred. So you could only eat the fish during a time of celebration. And this notion carried through the Mediterranean throughout the years. And so fish is a wonderful ingredient and a wonderful thing to cook and has been done in many, many ways in each of the Mediterranean cultures. The important thing, a recent study in 2011 found that an extra serving of fish per week could reduce heart disease risk by 50%. And then a hypertension journal also went through and they looked at women who didn't eat fish regularly, and they found that they were 50% more likely to get heart problems and had a 3 times greater risk of heart disease and other diseases, as well as high blood fat in their blood levels than other people who ate the fish at least once a week. So here are some of the wonderful versions that have the most nutrients that are available to us and that can be paired beautifully with the Mediterranean diet. Those are salmon, tuna, halibut, sole, mahi-mahi, shrimp, tilapia, and swordfish. In terms of the lean meats in the Mediterranean region, we're talking a lot about veal, goat, lean cuts of lamb, and a little bit of beef on special occasions. Here are some more of the wonderful benefits of seafood. It contains zinc, which is very good for our immune system support. It has potassium, which is really good for heart health. Selenium, known for having anti-cancer properties. Iodine, which is important for thyroid function. Vitamins A, which is good for the vision, organ function, and immune support. Vitamin D, which is really good for nutrient absorption, for strength, and for preventing diseases. We also found that seafood and fish in particular are good for lowering the risk of Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and decreased cognitive function that come with naturally aging. It's also good for subduing the symptoms of ADHD, relieving and preventing asthma, inflammation, and improving rheumatoid arthritis, which of course is linked to inflammation. It's also great for our beauty, helping keeping our skin and hair lustrous and reversing the UV damage. Fish is very good for enhancing our mood, helping with depression, postpartum depression, seasonal affective disorder, and also helping people with vision problems and age-related molecular degeneration. Now we move on to dairy and poultry. Again, dairy and poultry is something that should be eaten moderately, but a few times a week in the traditional Mediterranean diet. And we're looking at things like eggs and yogurt. Yogurt is really, really beneficial because of an ingredient called inulin. And we know about the probiotics pretty much, but inulin doesn't get a lot of press. Inulin is something that helps regulate our blood sugar levels. It looks like insulin without the S. And yogurt has this, so that's one of the reasons why it's good. Especially people with diabetes, this is a great thing to have at night before bed because it helps before you sleep at night to keep your blood sugar levels even. Cottage cheese, cow, sheep, and goat's milk cheese. Most of the cheeses we're seeing that are coming out of the Mediterranean region aren't made from cow, but from goat and sheep's milk cheese. Goat cheese is really, really wonderful because it contains some compounds which help with muscle response after strong physical activity. So athletes, goat cheese is a really good thing for them to be eating after a workout. Skim mozzarella and aged cheeses, we find that sometimes people who have lactose intolerance can tolerate some of the more aged cheeses. And then we also look at chicken, turkey, and Cornish hens. Culturally, some of the things to look at, just like we talked about the grains and how people ate them a little bit less regularly, also with the dairy and with the lean meats, people ate them a little less frequently. And the reason for that is if you had chickens or you had any kind of livestock, you would keep those alive, and that would provide the milk that you needed or the eggs throughout the day and to be the basis of kind of your everyday meals. You wouldn't necessarily kill anything because that would cut off a big piece of your economy unless there was going to be a celebration or a special occasion or a holiday. So people got used to the idea of not having meat or chicken meat present at the meals because of that. But dairy really kind of took center stage traditionally. And you will be hard pressed to go to any place in the Mediterranean that does not have a wonderful dairy culture. Each town in each country really is doing amazing things artisanally with all kinds of dairy. Wholesome baked goods are very, very important. I tell people this is a great thing if you want to take up a new activity, looking for a hobby, people have kids at home. Baking is a great thing because you can use quality ingredients, you have quality control, you know what you're putting into them. You can add in little things like some special seeds or spices that might be good and have particular properties that your family needs. And also the exercise and the psychological component. A lot of chefs and bakers joke around that we don't need therapists because we do so much baking, we just go into the kitchen and bake something. But seriously, by the time you bake a significant amount of fresh bread, you get a workout and you get a little bit of mental relief at the same time. So it's a wonderful practice. Olive oil. There's so much great information and research done recently on olive oil that I could have done a whole book just on that topic. And I have enough research just to do that. It couldn't all fit into this one book. But there are many other wonderful current books already available on olive oil, so I haven't ventured into that category. But I did have to include it because it's important. And I have a whole chapter for it with recipes that use predominantly olive oil in the recipes. Hippocrates, who we talked about earlier, used it for treating gastric ulcers and muscle pain and also cholera. But we found recently, and the reason they do so much research on olive oil is because it's available to everybody, and it's the one common denominator throughout the Mediterranean. No matter whether you're in Greece or Italy or Tunisia or Israel or Libya, you will find olive oil. So they can look at that and say, okay, the Mediterranean diet works because of this particular ingredient. So they found that it prevents the formation of blood clots. It lowers the levels of total blood cholesterol. It boosts the immune system, again, against the negative influences that come at it. They believe that it can prevent memory loss. It also helps against the risk of developing rheumatoid arthritis, as well as breast, colon, and bowel cancer, and melanoma. It's called green gold throughout history. Olives were first domesticated about 8,000 years ago, and this is from the region in the world that we now know as Israel, Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon. Archaeologists actually found pits dating back to about 8,000 years ago, and olive oil production evidence from about 6,000 years ago. So we've been using this as a long time. The ancient Egyptians, as early as about the 4th millennium before the Common Era, were using it not only as a food, but also in cosmetics and perfumes. And we know that olive oil has symbolic meaning in the Judeo-Christian and Islamic faiths. When I talk about olive oil, I like to follow it up right away with citrus juice, another easy swap out for people's daily diets, salad dressings. In the Mediterranean, there's no bottled salad dressing. It's all just olive oil, citrus juice, or olive oil and homemade wine vinegar. But citrus juice is really important because obviously it's low in calories, it's high in flavor, it has a lot of antibacterial properties, vitamins and minerals, anti-inflammatory properties. Lemon and lime, even though we think of them as an acid when we cook with them, they actually have an alkalizing effect on the pH levels in our body. So if we have a very high acidity, which leads to illness in all cases, or as a reaction to illness, then by putting lemon in the water, putting lime in the water, or just drizzling it on whatever you're eating will help to alkalize and stabilize those pH levels. And also, they've been proven to lower cholesterol. Here are some of the illnesses, generally, that we can say are improved by the Mediterranean diet. People who follow this diet are 47% less likely to develop heart disease. They can reverse the symptoms associated with Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, as well as reducing the risk of developing them. It can increase longevity. It can reduce inflammation. It can reduce the risk of death from heart disease and cancer. It can prevent cancer and inhibit cancer growth, as well as prevent and possibly reverse diabetes, hypertension, ADHD, and obesity. Here are some of the facts as related to the different types of illnesses. There was a great study done of a really large number, 7,447 people in 2013, where they looked at high-risk heart disease people. And they prevented 30% of heart attacks, strokes, and deaths from heart disease by following a Mediterranean diet. 2013, there was a study done by a professor in Spain which proves that heart disease could be reduced 30% by eating a diet that was rich in fruits, vegetables, and olive oil, therefore concluding a Mediterranean diet. We also, in terms of increasing longevity, these are some of the most recent types of research. They studied a group of women, 10,000 of them, from their 50s for about a period of 15 years. And they found that 40% of those who followed the Mediterranean diet were actually more likely to live past the age of 70. So now we're looking at a 20-year span without chronic illnesses, memory loss, or physical problems. And this is the only difference that they had in the control group, was that they followed a Mediterranean diet. They also had fewer strokes than people in that control group. Inflammation, as we may know, is at the base of kind of a lot of illnesses, and that's why an anti-inflammatory diet is so wonderful for people suffering from a lot of different issues. The Mediterranean diet is very effective in reducing inflammation. One doctor in particular who's local, Dr. Norton Fishman, helps to, he promotes the use of the Mediterranean diet for reducing inflammation to the majority of his patients who have Lyme disease and other chronic illnesses that have inflammation at the base. And he says that many of the people suffering from these types of illnesses develop insulin resistance and gluten sensitivity. So the low sugar and the healthful grains that are in the Mediterranean diet are really great for helping people with those type of illnesses. Cancer, unfortunately, plagues us a little bit too often today. But there is a bioflavonoid in a lot of vegetables that people would be eating every day who are following a Mediterranean diet that has anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory properties. Cannellini beans are also staple in the Mediterranean diet. We call those white kidney beans in English, and they're great for preventing colorectal cancer and are a great detoxifier. Strawberries and pears, which are easy to find, just make sure you get the organic variety, have a lot of fiber and vitamins, which are also known to prevent cancer. We talked a little bit earlier about cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and broccoli, and the properties which they possess to help us against cancer as well. Now, diabetes is something that can be helped. Fortunately, about 1 in 10 Americans today suffer from diabetes, and many more than that have prediabetes. So this is an important topic for us to look at. They studied 3,541 people in Spain who are very high risk for developing diabetes. They were between the ages of 55 and 80 years old, and they found that 87% of the high-risk patients were able to prevent the onset of diabetes just by following a Mediterranean diet. So it's a great number of people. Green leafy vegetables have a high amount of magnesium and a low glycemic index, so they're really important for people with type 2 diabetes. Eating them every day and on a daily basis has been shown to lower the risks associated with diabetes. And then there are some other ingredients which are particularly useful for people with diabetes, and those are pure cinnamon, cilantro, carrots, dark chocolate, and the inulin, which is found in yogurt. And it's important to know, one thing I want to mention, we're talking a lot about culinary medicine and things that are around in antiquity. Sometimes the varieties of plants change, and what's available on the market today and labeled as a certain ingredient might be different than what they actually used in antiquity. So as a researcher, do the research and find that a particular plant or spice worked for something, we have to make sure we know exactly which one so that it will have the same benefit for us. So if you're looking at cinnamon, you want to look at a pure cinnamon. You want to look at something like Ceylon cinnamon or something that comes from a different place, not the standard cinnamon that's available everywhere in the U.S. Because our cinnamon can contain about 20% of cassia in it, which is wonderful. It's another bark. It has other medicinal properties, but not necessarily for maintaining blood sugar levels. So always make sure that you're getting the right one. Cilantro, fresh cilantro is great for people with diabetes. Also these other ingredients that we mentioned. So those are some nice little easy additions into people's diets. In terms of hypertension, we're looking at vegetables being particularly beneficial because they have high levels of water, they're fat-free, and they're low in calories. So this can help people to maintain an even level of blood pressure. Pomegranates and paprika, which are really prominently used throughout the Mediterranean, are also great. So are the omega-3 fatty acids in fish. A Spanish study concluded that those who ate 2 to 3 servings or more of low-fat dairy actually had a 50% reduced risk of developing high blood pressure in the very beginning. Now, obesity. Again, vegetables at the base of the diet, main thing. So we're finding a common thread here throughout each of the illnesses. Vegetables, really, really important. The Mediterranean diet, again, fish and seafood 2 to 3 times a week. Fish is an excellent way for people to get protein, to build muscle, and also to lose weight and increase cognitive function. Beans as well, and lentils, which have low glycemic index, but a lot of fiber and protein make them really great for people trying to lose weight and also to gain muscle. Now, here are some of the things that people have to gain by eating healthfully. And I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but it's really important because sometimes we get busy, we have to juggle, we have to prioritize, and we just kind of lose touch with why it would be important to take these extra steps to implement these practices into our lifestyle. And better health, better performance, lower healthcare costs, and ways to pass down traditions. I think that a lot of times I give lectures and I either talk to doctors or I talk to individuals, people who might be implementing these things into their own lives. But it's also very important from a cultural and from a government standpoint to look at the importance of eating well. And luckily we have a lot of positive changes taking place in our culture today to try to help and reverse a lot of the negative trends. I want to branch out and talk even more about productivity, because if you ask people the number one reason usually why they're not eating healthfully, the number one reason is they don't have time. They have a demanding job. Medical doctors have some of the worst diets you'll ever see in your life, and it's because they work so hard and their hours are so long and the way that our structure is set up. So we want to make sure that people can have the time, set up to value what they eat and to be able to pass their own traditions on to their patients as well. And so with a better diet, a better lifestyle, people become more productive. So that's one of the things sometimes we have to remind ourselves as we've just got a couple more pages to type or a couple more things to do, a couple more clients to see. Everybody benefits by eating well. One of the things in terms of practicality, now we're going to talk about some tips for just to use at home in everyday life. And I think that when you start out with a new plan, it's so intimidating. So I tell people, you don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes we get excited, we make that switch. For me, it was the light bulb moment when I visited my relatives in Italy. For other people, it's another thing. I talked with a gentleman in the back who had his motives for staying healthy, and we want to just do it all at once. We run out to the grocery store, we've got the list, we've got the computer thing or the app, and we want to do it and we want to implement it in a week. It takes takes a long time. And I think the slow and steady wins the race. If you can do one thing a week, that really will show long-term results. The first thing is inspiration. Everybody's got to buy in. If you're part of a family or a household or a community where you all eat together, everybody's got to be involved in the process. Menus are a wonderful thing. We've really gotten away from doing that today because we're so high tech, but you've got to kind of have a menu plan in your head written down on the computer, on the phone, to be able to think about and make sure that you're getting the right nutrients in every meal. Grocery lists are important, and I tell people this is a week-long process. If you wait until the day that you have to shop and cook and prep to do everything, you're setting yourself up for failure. I'm a professional, and I can't do it that way. I have to do professional things and personal things over the course of the week because it's easier that way. And I always tell people not to cook on the same day that they shop and prep. That gives them a little bit of a break in between. I tell people to use weekends for inspiration or whatever their days off. Maybe on like a Monday or Tuesday, that's the kind of day when you want to think whenever you have 5 minutes, well, okay, these are the things I would like to make. These are the things my family likes. How does that kind of fit together? And what might I be buying on Friday or Saturday when I do my groceries? And then to make a meal plan that includes literally every single time you eat. A lot of times people make grocery lists that just consist of dinner, but you have breakfast, lunch, snacks, and all of these other things in between that need to be thought of. And it's important to get all the meals covered, or as much of them as possible. That's how you know you're going to stay on track. And then I tell people, if you have a traditional weekend, maybe make your grocery list on Wednesday or Thursday. Shop and prep on Friday, and then cook on Saturday or Sunday. So these are some tips for planning ahead. This is my motivation that I give people. It's a Michael Pollan quote, which I love. The shared meal elevates eating from a mechanical process of fueling the body to a ritual of family and community, from the mere animal biology to an act of culture. And that's our goal. So we have to make an honest meal plan if we want to reach that. And the first way to make an honest meal plan is by being honest with ourselves about what we like to eat and being honest about with whoever we're cooking for or preparing the meal with and what they like to eat. And what I mean by that is don't just look at what you normally cook at home. Look at what you normally eat. So if you go out to eat 5 nights a week right now, and then tomorrow you decide that you're going to be the next week just cooking at home, you're going to want to incorporate those elements that you're eating from out. Maybe you go out to eat and you like to eat Thai and El Salvadorian and Ethiopian. But then when you cook at home, you cook food that's from the southern United States or from the Midwest. You're not going to be happy cooking at home if you're used to eating Ethiopian and Thai and all these great, wonderfully vivid flavors from around the world. So you'll want to incorporate those recipes and those ideas and those influences, those flavors into your home meal. And that way you're setting yourself up for success so you won't have the urge to order out because you already have those flavors at home. Another thing is to look at schedule. Maybe you're going to have 3 nights that you're not going to be home. Okay, so those aren't going to be nights to cook at home. You want to plan in advance and kind of think about those. Anticipate any obstacles. And think about which foods are best for you. Maybe you don't start out with a food plan that's all low fat and power foods. Maybe you start out with a food plan that has avocados because I need this type of healthful fat, or it has lots of yogurt because I'm trying to prevent the onset of diabetes. So you're looking at the foods that have specific properties which will benefit you or your family, and that's a great place to start from as well. And other than that, it's just making a list of priorities and which things are most important for you and which ideas can give you the most bang for your buck. Maybe people derail with snacks, so having some dried fruits and nuts and seeds ready to go in little Ziploc bags every day, that's a way to stay on target. Here, this is a handy guide that I give people. We all forget, and especially me, I go back and forth between the US system and the metric system of measurements all the time, so I'm always messing up with measurements. So I have to use very visual signs. So a fist is usually a cup, and a cup is usually a serving in most American standards of a cooked grain or a salad or vegetable, something like that. So it's good to know your fist is the size of a cup. The palm is usually 3 ounces, and that's the serving size cooked of fish or chicken or meat. So to have that little reminder of this is how much fish, chicken, or meat I should be eating. Now, think about when you go to a restaurant. You're usually getting a serving that's bigger than your whole hand. So you want to just remember that's a serving. Thumb is 1 ounce. A thumb tip is a teaspoon. So usually a teaspoon is what we would have of olive oil if we're garnishing it with something. And the handful, like nuts or seeds, 1 to 2 ounces. So that's a great cheat sheet. They're all available all over the internet, and you can use that. when you're at home. Here are some tips to save money, because right after time, money's the big reason why most people don't eat healthfully. They see it as a waste, or maybe they can't afford it. But if you can use a couple tips, it can actually be less expensive to eat healthfully than it is to eat poorly. So look at fresh produce, which is usually on sale. Think about August. August in this area, all around the Chesapeake, we've got lots of corn, we've got lots of peaches, we've got lots of tomatoes. They're beautiful, they're tasty, they're cheap, they're ripe. Everyone's got them. That's what you want to be eating in August. Our bodies actually benefit by eating the food that's growing at that time in the area. So if we live in this area and we eat that food, it's very good for us. Whereas if we were to go to South America at the time, where it's a different season, and we eat the foods that they have because we're on a trip, that food won't be as nutritious for us, even if it's very nutritious local fruit, because our body craves from the area that we live in. So that's something, and it's less expensive when it's in season. Buy in bulk. All of these wonderful things we talked about, the beans, the grains, the seeds, the nuts, you can get them all in bulk. They're cheaper, less expensive, and can be used at any time. And they also help you to set up a great pantry, because if you've got a good pantry at home and stuff ready to go, you're less likely to have to order out. I always tell people you should have things in your pantry that you can whip up a quick dish more quickly than it takes to order carryout. And I'd like to invite you all to, I have a YouTube channel just on the topic of quick dishes, where I have all of these 90-second videos that I created for a news library that go on about 28 different syndicated news channels throughout the country. But they're very quick, easy recipes, so you're welcome to access those. I always recommend people to cook and make dishes from scratch and to make extra. Anytime you cook or bake, always be doing double, even if you live alone. You can freeze it, you can use it later, you can use it in a couple of days, but you'll be setting yourself up for success that way. Of course, bringing lunches and snacks at work, and drinking water instead of drinks. Right on the Mediterranean diet pyramid, there's water. It's just one of the elements. That's what people drink with their meals, maybe 1 glass of wine per day in some areas, but other than that, it's all about the water. Here are some tips for saving time. I always recommend people to clean their vegetables, soaking them in, or fruits in vinegar or in some kind of great spray that's going to take anything that might be added to them off, and chop once a week. Put everything into little bags or little containers and get it sorted out, almost as if you were at a salad bar. That way, if you come home late at night, you can just throw things together for a quick salad, a quick stir fry, and you're ready to go. It might take you a half an hour one day, but you're saving time all week long. Double batches, we talked about. These healthy kind of grab-and-go little snack mix bags are very easy and especially good for kids. I tell people to make lunch the night before and to organize your grocery lists like the grocery store. I always do this. I started doing it because of professional events that I had to do groceries for, but then I ended up doing it on my own. It saves so much time. So you have an area for the produce, you have an area for fish, you have an area for dairy, you have an area for the bakery, and you just go pantry, and you just go through the grocery store that way. It cuts at least 20 minutes out of your grocery tip. Now, this is the one that makes everybody laugh. I tell people if you want to be healthful, you have to not avoid food and not, keep it off limits like it's the plague, but you actually have to think about it, embrace it, think about it constantly. The more you think about food, the more healthful you will be. And there's a psychological reason for that. And that is, when we are away from food, if I were in this room all day long just looking at this computer screen, my body would go into a stress response mode, thinking that I was starving and not knowing where I was going to get my next meal from. Because remember, we were designed a long time ago when things weren't so convenient. So that stress response would send stressors into my body and hormones, which would help me to be more hungry, eat more, digest my food more poorly, and absorb less nutrients from it. But if I'm around food, if I have a fruit bowl at my desk, if I can smell food, if I can hear people talking about food, if I can look at food, I'm actually going to absorb the nutrients in the meal that I eat better. I will digest the food more slowly, and I will eat less. Plus, from a practical standpoint, if you're thinking about food, you always have a plan. And the plans help you to stay on track. Whereas it's when you're really hungry and really tired and your cortisol levels are up, that's where you're going to eat the more fatty foods. You're going to crave the salty foods. It's natural. So these are some little tips that people can use in morning, when to prep. Think about dinner in the morning. At noon, if you have to make a grocery list, that's a good time to do it. Get some inspiration for dinner. At night, you should be thinking about the breakfast for the next day. I was reading a wonderful book from a fellow cookbook author friend of mine named Monica Bidet last night, and she mentions in her book the story about the mother was always talking about the next night's dinner at dinner that night. Perfect. I said, I'm going to use that tomorrow. That's the perfect time when you should be thinking about dinner, is the night before. So very Mediterranean. Here are some events that I have coming up if anybody's interested, and some topics. My next book will be out at Christmas time. It's called the Italian Diabetes Cookbook. I'm doing that with the American Diabetes Association, and it's all Italian regional authentic recipes that fit into a healthful diabetes-friendly plan. And then I also do culinary tours. My next one will be a Tuscan cuisine and culture tour. It's going to be taking place on June 7th. There are still a few places available if anybody's interested. And there will be another tour in October. And this is really where we take the culture of Tuscany to life. We talk about things like opera and its influence on food. We have Mediterranean diet days where we tour the olive oil manufacturers, and we do all kinds of wonderful things on that tour. All of this information is on my website. And the last thing I'd like to leave you with before opening up to questions is this quote from one of the Greek sages that moderation is best. So I think if there's anything to take from today's topic, that would be the best quote. Thank you all for coming. Yes. So I would love to take any questions. Yes, Liver.
I think it was on the grain page, you listed cranberries. And I didn't understand why it was there.
Okay. So the question was in talking about grains, I mentioned cranberries. I believe that was in the beans section. So there are cranberry beans. They're actually cranberry beans. They come out, they're fresh. We can get them in DC 1 week. I don't remember if it's July or August, but you can see them at the farmer's market. They're delicious. They're beautiful little, they look like art. They're white and purplish pink marbled, and they're absolutely delicious. So cranberry beans, those are something. Cranberries are also wonderful for us, but I don't talk about them so much in this because cranberries are actually native to America. So when I go to Italy and cook, I have to bring cranberries with me in order to do it. But great question. Thank you. Next time I'll make a point to notice that I'm talking about beans, not the fruit. Any other questions? Yes.
When you talk about fish, you don't say fish and seafood. So is there a huge distinction between fish on the one hand and, say, shellfish on the other hand?
Oh, that's a great question. The question was, is there a distinction between fish and shellfish when you talk about the nutritional benefits? Some of the benefits are overlapping, and so some of them might generally have omega-3s and things like the good fatty acids in them and things that we want. But when we talk in terms of the Mediterranean diet specifically about fish, then it's just fish. And most of the studies that have been done on the type of cognitive benefits and anti-depression and different things in fish are talking about fish alone. But when they talk about protein and other ingredients like that, then they also talk about seafood. And all seafood, even shellfish, is so popular in the Mediterranean that it does get a lot of attention, although less medical research. And some types of seafood, like scallops, might have a little bit more cholesterol or a little more of other ingredients that people have to watch. So shellfish, not necessarily 2 to 3 times a week. Fish in general, maybe shellfish a little bit less, like 1 time, depending on what it is, depending on which type. Each one has their own, like shrimp, and they all have their own nutritional values. That's a great question. Yes?
Another fish question. Do you prefer farm-raised salmon or outside?
That's a great question, and it changes every day, the answer, depending upon the USDA and what their findings are and what the fish practices are. So when I teach, sometimes I teach seafood for beginners cooking classes, and what I do is I'll print, you can go online and Google the government's list of the safe fishes, and also Whole Foods Market usually has it at their counter, and it will tell you as of like that month what the current practices are and which ones are, but because it really does change. So I don't ever give it out, because in the event that I tell you and then it's wrong, I would hate to do that. But Google it, because it's like a 3-page list of each type of fish and seafood, whether they're farmed or raised, which country to get it from, which country not to get it from. And there's the choices that we should be using, the best choices, then there's like the mediocre choices, and there's the things to definitely avoid. So, and I tell people, and this is your question reminds me of another question that I get a lot. People ask me, well, it says that frozen whatever is not as good as fresh. What should I do? And I tell them, look, of course I prefer fresh. I'm promoting the Mediterranean diet. I'm a chef. Everybody's going to tell you fresh. But if you have the choice of using frozen fish or frozen vegetables versus the drive-through or carry-out, I'm going to tell you, use frozen fish or use frozen. It's a matter of prioritizing what we have in our life, So, great question. Thank you. Yes.
I've been reading conflicting information about frying with olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion about using olive oil to fry?
Sure, that's a great question. She asked about frying in olive oil and what my opinion is. And I have a very strong opinion about this. All throughout the Mediterranean, people fry in olive oil. In Spain, they actually even use the residual olive oil for fuel for automobiles and buses. So you can fry in olive oil, and it's been done for many, many years. In our culture, you've always heard that it has a lower smoking point, and so you can't use it. You have to use these other olive oils. I don't know who actually eventually started that saying, but if you look at it, many types of olive oil actually have just as high, if not a higher smoke point. So I do recommend in it. What you want to do when you fry with olive oil is to use pure olive oil, which is less filtered than, more filtered than others. So it will have a higher smoke point. It's not the one that you want to drizzle on your salad. It's not the extra virgin. You just get a pure olive oil. It's less expensive. Usually comes in a big bottle. And if you're going to fry, that's what you can fry. And the reason I like it is because, in addition, that's what people had. It was around as part of the tradition, and the taste. If you fry an ingredient like risotto croquette in olive oil, it's going to have a very different taste than if you fry it in any other kind of olive oil. So it's good for taste, and of course we shouldn't be frying that much anyway. But I do fry in olive oil personally, and all throughout the Mediterranean, it's done. Good question. Yes.
How do you feel about honey and agave nectar?
Oh, sure.
Sugar? It was on one of your slides, but I'm not
Yes.
sure you got it.
So the question was about honey and agave nectar. Great question. I love honey because just like olive oil, it's one of those nature's miracle foods. And if we're using a local, especially raw honey, it's so good for us. And I do believe it's a medicine. So I love it. Agave nectar is also very good, and I use agave nectar not as much for flavor, but in baking when I'm doing all the diabetes-friendly recipes. So the new book that I mentioned coming out, and my third book was also with the American Diabetes Association. A lot of the sweets have agave nectar in them. If you're using honey instead of sugar, I usually do an even swap out, so it's like cup per cup. But you will then need to, if you're baking, you'll need to alter your dry ingredients because sugar's dry and honey's wet, so you need to make it work. If you're using agave nectar, instead of if you're using a cup of sugar, you would substitute about 2/3 a cup of agave nectar because it's more strong. And then you would have to adjust your dry ingredients a little bit more. And then you would have to add another kind of flavor that complements well the strong nutty type flavor that agave can have. And different agaves taste differently. I use both of them. One thing that I would go more towards honey for taste and also for the healing, but I think agave is good and even, and it's a sugar substitute that people can use. One thing important to keep in mind as we look at sugar substitutes is our brains don't know the difference between real sugar and fake sugar. So if you're just, if you're having Diet Coke instead of regular Coke because you think, you're being more healthful, you really have to look at that because our brain will still crave more sugar. The more sugar we have, the more it craves, and it doesn't know. So, good question. Agave is also, one more thing. Agave is good for maintaining even blood sugar levels. So that's why we use it in the diabetes thing. People can have a piece of a dessert or a single serving size that won't cause their blood sugar levels to rise, whereas honey still may. But honey also has a lot of wonderful benefits. Yes?
I can relate, but so you're saying that like eating pizza is healthy?
Eating pizza is healthy? Eating pizza can be healthy, yes. If it's a natural, but see, that's a good question because it makes us laugh because, and unfortunately, and I talk about this a lot in the next book. Tomorrow I'm actually giving a lecture at the National Italian American Foundation where I'm going to talk about Italian food's role in the diet. I'm going to address this particularly because when we think of Italian food, we think of pizza and pasta and we think about how bad they are for us. But if pizza and pasta are done well, the true way, the traditional way, they're not the best thing for us, but they're certainly not going to hurt us, and they can be part of a healthful diet. So yes, if they're done with real good quality flours, good quality cheese, homemade tomato sauce, and maybe some good fresh vegetables or other ingredients, it can be healthful. Yes, and I do have a recipe in this book. Yes.
Where do you get your dried fruit? I mean, so that it's not extra sugar.
Oh, that's a good question. Dried fruit, if you want to buy it without the added sugar, any of the local health food stores will have it. In our area, we have My Organic Market, Mom's, or Whole Foods. Any of those can have it. They also have, for example, apricots which don't have sulfur added to them, so they'll be brown instead of orange, but they're good flavor. And a lot of the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern stores in the area have great natural sun-dried fruits. Yes?
I just wanted to hear your take on, I've heard of beans being inflammatory
Uh-huh.
sometimes. I just wanted to know if that's
should all people have beans in their diet?
That's a good question. Sometimes the question was, are all beans inflammatory, and should people avoid them because of something that she'd heard that they could be? When we look at a particular ingredient, we have to look at which variety, because they wouldn't all have the same negative effects. The same positive effects that they have are they're high fiber, high in protein, and low in some of the other fat and things that we're worried about. So those are the good things. But depending upon what people have and sometimes what medications they're on, that can cause them to react in a certain way. So if you're worried about that, I would really examine it. But in general, if people are just wanting to be anti-inflammatory, can they have beans? Of course, it should be at least one time a day, a different bean or